Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Happy Recap Podcast. And this is the week of November 15th, 2020. The year continues onward despite our pleadings. Please, 2020, stop! It still continues. So that's the way things are going. But in the one bright corner of the known universe is Metsdom. And normally it is the darkest part of the universe, my friend, DJ. And really over the last couple weeks, it's become one of the great bright spots as we continue to get to know our new owner, Steve Cohen. Of course, we talked last week about his press conference, but I want to talk a little bit about some of the aftermath of his press conference. And also, as we have seen some reactions to it and some things have occurred because of them. So we've also discovered that this man has a great sense of humor, really does seem to enjoy interacting with the fans on a continuing basis. And, it is a team that is well on its way to vast improvement. I think that when we look at this team, EJ, in 10 years, it's going to be hard to remember how it was, I think. That's how good it's going to get.
You know, I'll tell you, you said on last week's podcast that press conference is a top 10 all-time Mets moment, which I agreed with. And I think from the fallout this past week that we've seen, the ramifications of said press conference, I think it really holds that up to be a truth. That Steve really speaking not just to the fans and getting us fired up, but getting a lot of players around baseball fired up about the potential of playing for him. And we both kind of said that we didn't think he would continue the volume of social media interaction that he did in that first week. Well, I think this week kind of proved that while he won't be tweeting as much as he did that first week, he still plans on being a continuing voice to the fans and letting the fans know some of his thinking behind the scenes.
Yeah, and he also got his mighty check mark, which Twitter doesn't hand out as easily as they used to. So that was impressive. But I think the most impressive of all of his, he is taking some really ridiculous questions. He's taking them in stride, and he is responding to them with a good amount of humor and New York snark. My personal favorite was there was a fan that asked him, what would you rather fight? I think it was 100 Bartolo Colognes the size of a duck, or one duck the size of Bartolo Colon. And his response, in fairness to him, his response was, if I dream of that tonight, I'm blaming you.
Yeah, that was a funny one. My favorite this week was after he got his check mark, he got a hearty congratulations from Howie Rose, who said, now can you help me get mine?
And one thing that I did notice, somebody had said something about Gary Cohen in the mix and saying, Cohen and Mets, it's a name that goes together. And Steve Cohen had thrown out, our broadcast team is A1. And so I think if there's anybody out there that might have worried that, well, I hope Steve is a fan of Gary, Keith, and Ron, or Howie and Wayne. It would appear that, very much the case is yes, he is. Even though I think in both cases, I believe the networks technically hire them, but with input from the team. But I thought that was a good question answered that hadn't been asked, but I think that was in the back of several fans' minds. What would this mean long term, especially should down the road Steve pick up SNY?
Right. I think that was a concern of some fans. I think that was kind of a clickbait piece that was written a couple of weeks ago in that regard. But I definitely think we've said it all along. Steve Cohen is a fan of the Mets. So if you're a fan of the New York Mets, I kind of feel like you have to be dead inside if you don't consider our television booth to be the best in the business and our radio booth to be the best in the business. But Gary, Keith, and Ron, they are just absolutely the best. And there's no reason why Cohen would want to replace them. And then, of course, like you said, if he's going to be picking up SNY in the next couple of weeks, then ultimately that would be his decision. So I think that our broadcast teams will remain in good standing for the upcoming seasons.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, especially as it relates to Howie and Gary and Keith and Ron, it really is, in my opinion anyway, as a fan, their jobs till they want to sit back and go, I'm done. I mean, I think they have a job for life if they want it, in my opinion. I mean, I don't know that there are any contracts. And of course, Keith loves to snark about his contract now and then when it comes up. But I don't think there's any of them have any desire to break up their teams. I think the only possible change could be down the road if Gelbs gets a Burkhart like offer. And while I love Steve Gelbs, he's not Kevin Burkhart. He doesn't have that that I'm aware of the diversity of skills. I think we've all gotten used to Steve, and we like Steve. But he's not Kevin Burkhart, and he's not going to be that lead guy on Fox. But I think that with this broadcast team, for the most part, I see it sticking together for the foreseeable future. One thing I did not necessarily see sticking together were some parts of the rotation of the 2019 New York Mets, and one of the people most impressed by the press conference was Marcus Stroman. Now, in the hours after the press conference, as probably right around the time that our podcast posted, were some rumblings that a player had his agent call Sandy after the press conference. And of course, everybody's like, Real Muto, it's got to be Real Muto. No, it's got to be Springer's agent. Maybe it was Scott Boras, and all the different things. And at one point, I saw somebody say, I heard it was a Met player. And I don't remember if it was somebody reliable or I just happened to catch a tweet from a rando that happened to be right. But that was indeed the case. As basically after that press conference, Marcus Stroman said, "That's a man I want to play for. That's a man I want to go to battle for." And said, "I'm accepting the qualifying offer. Let's do this."
And that was phenomenal news. It's something we were all hoping to hear.
Yep.
We all
and didn't expect.
Right. We all wanted him to accept that QO, and he did. And I think what it comes down to is Marcus Stroman, while being a very good baseball player, is also an emotional player. And
yes.
He does not hide it. He wears his emotions on his sleeves.
He's proud of them, and he should be.
Absolutely. And what he saw in that press conference is an owner who is going to share his emotion about his desire to win. If you recall, Stroman was a little disappointed initially to come to the Mets because he wanted to go to the Yankees because he thought he had a better shot at winning there. This guy really cares about winning, and what he saw on display in Steve Cohen is a guy who has every intention of building a winner, and I know he put that 3 to 5 year tag on it. I don't think Steve Cohen has any intention of waiting 3 years to be vying for a championship.
I will go so far as to say this. I think Marcus Stroman is going to be so impressed by Steve Cohen and the process that I don't think he makes it back to free agency. That is my bold prediction. I believe that we will sign a deal long-term with Marcus Stroman prior to the conclusion of the 21 season or right after it.
Totally agree. Barring injury, it's just the only thing that I can see stopping it. If Stroman comes back, proves he's healthy, and he just basically performs like Marcus Stroman, and we know what he can do when he's right, I think he remains a Met for a very long time.
And I am 100% happy with that. And one of the beautiful things about the quote-unquote new Mets, if you will, as framed 15 years ago by Carlos Beltran, the new Mets, it doesn't have to stop there. Somebody accepting the qualifying offer in 2020 does not hamstring the New York Mets in the improvements they need to make in filling the holes that they need to fill. We actually have a chance now of improving this team despite this money spent.
Right. Absolutely. We knew that we needed a piece of the rotation, and a lot of us were debating back and forth. Could it be Stroman? Could it be Bauer? We definitely need one of them. And now we're sitting here saying, hey, maybe we need both of them.
And that's something that I have been saying for a while. Is somebody said, would you want Bauer or Stroman? And I'm like, in an ideal world, both. Why would you not? Why would you want to choose if you don't have to? And knowing that, that Steve was incoming and potentially could do that, if that was what his baseball department recommended to him, and the questions, well, now would the Mets be interested in that after Stroman? No sooner did we get Stroman back in the fold, basically Sandy Alderson starts using the media to flirt with Trevor Bauer and his agent. That's the only word I could use. It was kind of like they were playing footsie through the media. And the interest was very definitely mutual.
No doubt. That was a great exchange with Sandy, going on the talk shows, talking up Bauer, and Bauer definitely acknowledging it and sending back his love for Sandy as an executive. And it was really fun to watch that back and forth between the two of them. And, I don't know anything about Bauer personally. I don't know what's in his head. I've had no contact with anyone who does, but it just kind of feels to me like he wants to be a Met. That's just the vibe that I was getting from his social media this week.
I mean, I think he was absolutely, he was on that same boat. And I think it was one of those things where that press conference, the ramifications of that press conference may not be fully known for years. Because there were players watching that press conference, I guarantee you, that are not a free agent for 2 years. They're not a free agent for 3 years. They're still in their rookie contract. Maybe they're in their second year of playing. Who knows? But they were paying attention to that. And they'll see the results combined with that press conference. It's planted a seed. And then the next 3 to 5 years, as he's referred to, if they're successful, if they are what we expect them to be, even if it's sooner, these are players that will be instructing their agents, do not let me sign anywhere without talking to the Mets first. And isn't that glorious?
I liken it to the end of the movie Jerry Maguire, when Cuba Gooding Jr. and Tom Cruise's characters are hugging and rejoicing with one another. And the one player looks over at his agent, Jay Moore, and says, how come our relationship isn't like that? And Jay Moore tries to give him a hug in a very awkward moment. I kind of feel like that's how other players are looking at Steve Cohen right now. That how come my owner doesn't take the social media to basically just gleam about me and isn't all about me and isn't reaching out both publicly and privately to try to make me feel good about my position with this organization. I kind of feel like that's the way that players are looking at Steve Cohen, and no more so was that evident than after basically Cohen getting Stroman to sign the qualifying offer, then Sandy going and having this little flirting session with Bauer. You see Noah Syndergaard step up and say, hey, just so you guys know, I'm still here. And Sandy, I'm kind of loving what you're saying. I'm picking up what you're putting down. And don't forget me, because I want to be part of your Mets organization too as soon as possible.
And I think that you look at Noah Syndergaard, and I think that we're in a very likely to potentially be in the same position with him next year that we were with Marcus Stroman. And the fact that he's already impressed is a good thing, because I think Noah is a big candidate for a qualifying offer, because he's likely not getting a big deal from anyone else. He's not going to get it from the Mets. He's got to prove he's healthy after the Tommy John. And you know how good he could be when he's good. I've always said there are a couple holes in his game, and I think he has the capability to fix those holes. I think he has the ability to, and I believe that Jeremy Hefner is the right guy to do that for him. I think the willingness to listen to him, and the fact is, well, okay, I'm a guy. I really would prefer he was wearing a shirt when he shows these videos. That's just me. But not because I think it's disgusting. It's because it makes me feel bad about myself. Okay, that's the reality of it. But after all, the other day, my daughter told me that if my stomach got any bigger, it would be a bed. So that gives you the right idea as to I do not have Noah Syndergaard's 6-pack, or 8-pack or 12-pack or whatever it is at this point. But the reality of it is you watch that and you just go, oh, he's on the way back, man. He is on the way back. And this, come All-Star break time, whether or not there's an All-Star game at all, but All-Star break time, woo, this could get really special really fast.
And I think that's a realistic way to look at it right now. You got to think All-Star break. I know he looked good in that video. That was a couple pitches. Everyone does need to kind of temper their enthusiasm a little bit. he's not going to be back in April. He's not going to be back in May. I think All-Star break is a fair time to look at it. And I think your point to him having to take a qualifying offer, I think that's fair as well. Even if he comes back around the All-Star break and he's absolutely dominant for the next 2.5 months, I don't think he gets a long-term lengthy deal out of that from anyone. And I think the qualifying offer route may be the way to go. But it's interesting because I felt like even prior to them announcing the Tommy John surgery, I felt like Syndergaard was falling, or Mets fans were falling a little out of love with Syndergaard. There's definitely some personality traits that were rubbing us the wrong way, I think. Certainly, he doesn't help himself sometimes on social media. But I feel like with what he did the other day, by kind of being the old Noah who was joking around a little bit and professing his love for the organization and the direction it's heading, I definitely think Noah can do what it takes to rekindle the love that the Mets fans once had in their hearts for him.
Yeah, he doesn't have to. He certainly doesn't have the. He's not as deep in the hole as Mr. Harvey was at his worst. Now, certainly Matt Harvey never got out of the hole with most fans, and understandably so. But the reality of it is, I don't think he's dug himself as deep. And there are certain things that have annoyed me in his game, more so than his personality. Sometimes I do think he leans too heavily on being a thrower and doesn't focus enough on being a pitcher, which I know some people are like, well, that doesn't exist. That's not a real thing. When you're just throwing gas, it is kind of a real thing. And there are times for finesse pitches. And there comes a point in your career, especially after Tommy John surgery, that, yeah, go ahead and throw the gas, throw the heat. But let's have that 78 mile an hour curveball that they're never going to see coming, ready to go for an out pitch. That's the kind of thing I want to see from Noah. I'd like to see some sort of secret or rarely used off-speed pitch for those situations where everybody's just looking gas, and I'm going to clobber it. But other than that, I mean, I have no problem with Noah at all. I mean, his shtick, I suppose, if you will, can get tiresome for some, and I get it totally. I just don't really pay attention to it as much as I probably should. But, I'm more concerned about what's going on out on the mound. And the same thing with Bauer. I know he's got a lot of shtick going on too. But if he goes out and wins 20 games, he can wear a clown suit the rest of the day for all I care. And that's really all of them. I mean, win us some ball games, and as long as you're not out robbing stores in between innings, I'm really okay with what you bring to the table.
Look, the bottom line is the shtick is perfectly fine. I would even go so far as to say the shtick is fun when you're winning. I mean, Mets
way
fans,
more fun when you're winning.
Right. We all absolutely thought it was the funniest thing in the world when Jake DeGrom dropped Daniel Murphy's chair at a post-game press conference when the Mets were in the playoffs, leading to the infamous quotes, "Yowzers." Not cool, Jake. We all loved that. We thought it was funny. So as long as you're winning, the shtick is fine. I think he was just getting a little bit tiresome with Noah, the fact that the team wasn't thriving and he was still doing some of his social media stuff. That being said, I anticipate this team, particularly if they do add Bauer, I anticipate this team is going to be a winner this year. Will they win it all? Who knows? But I think at the very least, they're playoff contenders, probably likely going to make the playoffs. And that being said, if that's a playoff team and I've got these guys goofing around on social media with one another, I will embrace it. I love goofing around on social media. So I would absolutely love seeing these guys have a little bit of shtick back and forth with one another.
Yeah, I mean, the reality of it is you add a Bauer to this rotation and you have Syndergaard come back, at the All-Star break. You have a rotation that is equal, if not greater, than almost every rotation in the league, and certainly very close to, pitching-wise, your nearest competitor, the Washington Nationals. And, by and large, you probably have the better bullpen there too. So, I mean, it really is an interesting thing to think that alone could be what puts you over the edge in this division, and very well could.
And the other thing to remember is you probably have the better bullpen than them as assembled today. That doesn't include any moves that Sandy might make to even further strengthen that bullpen in the offseason. I definitely don't think that they're going to stand pat when it comes to relief arms. I think they're going to make at least an acquisition or two there to try to bolster that bullpen. So I think you're right. I think we would have the dominant starting pitching, and I think we would have the better bullpen. So I really think if you go to bat with those four arms, of course, Syndergaard coming back midseason, but even still, those four arms heading down a stretch run, I think the rest of the league would be in big trouble in that case.
Speaking of relievers, did you catch Jarrett Hughes on Twitter? I think it was last night.
I did not.
He is one of the most unique people in baseball. I think we figured that out by now, especially on social media, but just in general. Right before, I think it was pretty much before bedtime, he decides to tell the story of how he's an open mouth sleeper. And one night he went and ate half a bagel and he slept and he dreamt he was drooling all night after eating the bagel. And in the morning he swept off the drool and it was ants.
Ah,
And he had ants in his mouth and ants along his tail. And it's like moral of the story, sleep with your mouth closed. And I'm just like, oh, that is so screwed up, dude. There are people lost sleep over that, I am sure. It's the stuff of nightmares.
well, that's the stuff that social media is made for. I want to hear
And
those
that's,
stories.
oh, absolutely. And you know, my first thought is, resign this guy. It's the, I mean, you know, he had some good outings and a couple bad ones overall, Hughes, but you know, the reality of just the personality, having somebody unique like that in the clubhouse, you go, yeah, you got to have one of those. You got to have one of those. You got to have one of those people who's just, you know, just a bit of an oddball, your Turk Wendell types. You know, for those great teams, Roger McDowell. I mean, you know, all the great Met teams had a Tug McGraw, you know, just a little left of center and a little out there. But yeah, I was greatly humored by that and disgusted at the same time. That's which takes something. Trying to change gears a little bit here, and then we're going to go to the second part of our interview with Greg Prince from Faith and Fear in Flushing from a few weeks back. But the front office continues to be assembled. A couple little pieces here and there, nothing on the player side, on the baseball ops side. But one interesting name came off the table the other day, and I wanted to talk a little bit about Kim Ng, who is somebody that I think, I mean, it's a name that we've been familiar with for many years. Most Met fans, unfortunately, came into heard of her first because of a very unfortunate incident between her and it was referred to briefly as this stupid idea called the stupid scouts, as I called them, the super scouts. And the Mets hired one who proceeded to get drunk and make racial comments. So that was a beautiful thing. But to see her finally get an opportunity with the Marlins in that GM chair, I mean, first of all, 15 years overdue, at least, because she's been trying for 16. So I'm going to say 15 years overdue. One of the great minds in baseball. Congratulations to the Marlins for helping break the glass ceiling, but by golly, way overdue.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, we have seen in the past 2 weeks, we have seen glass ceilings getting shattered in this country, and it's an awesome thing. Honestly, I was almost a little bummed that she took the Marlins job because I thought she would have been perfectly suited for the Mets. Let's think about when she was working with the Dodgers, she saw a financially unstable owner, hated by the fans, Major League Baseball trying to push him out, end up losing his team, selling his team to a financially solvent team of owners who were changing the philosophy of that organization completely. They were changing the standard protocol procedures on how they were going to do it. Basically, they came in and just changed the entire franchise. And you look at the Mets, that's exactly what's going on here. So she's seen it up close and personal and played a major hand in it. I thought she would have been perfect for the Mets. Obviously, that's not the route that they were going to go in. I'm sure whoever they do hire is going to be a good hire. I'm sure it's going to be somebody that I approve of, but I really thought that could have been a union that would have worked.
I think, I mean, it's funny. One of the things that going back to when the Mets hired Omar Minaya after Jim Duquette back in, that was 04 going into 05, I believe it was. And I think pretty much ever since then, in the back of my mind every time, when you're like, so who's some of the people you would consider from Mets GM when we hired Sandy, when we hired Brody, etc. She was always on my list every time. Um, and including this time in the back of my head. I hadn't really made a list because it's kind of hard to make a list when you actually kind of don't know at all what they're looking for or what they feel they need. But with this situation, my guess is that is not knowing the people involved. My guess is that she was either too far along with dealing with the Marlins to think about another team, or they mutually decided, no, the Marlins is your better fit. Why don't you go thrive in Miami? Congratulations on getting a gig. You deserve it. So I mean, that kind of thing. So I mean, I don't know that the Mets were not a player whatsoever in talking to her. If Sandy's truly doing his due diligence, and I believe that he is, I'm sure some level of contact was made, but that's for him to discuss if he ever feels comfortable, or her to discuss if she feels comfortable, I suppose. But I'm certainly looking forward to seeing who they have in mind. I've heard some names so far. They are good names. They are solid names. And hopefully there are names that will help land Trevor Bauer and several other players before we get too much further into the winter.
Yeah, I would anticipate that we probably, maybe even this week, will have, if not know who the GM is going to be, who it's narrowed down to. Because, like you said, it's time to start making some moves, some acquisitions, and obviously you can't do that until the GM is in place. So it would surprise me if this thing lags on much longer.
Yeah, I think so, and certainly we'll keep you guys up to date if there is an announcement during the week. It doesn't take much to hop on and do a couple minutes on that, so we'll certainly plan that discussion should it be needed during the week. But speaking of discussions, one of my favorite discussions lately has been our talk with Greg Prince from Faith and Fear in Flushing. And, I think of a lot of Mets fans out there. There's so many. I mean, Steve talks about they're knowledgeable, passionate, and all the different great qualities that Steve described in a Met fan at his press conference apply to Greg Prince. He is who I strive to be as a fan. I'm a fan of a fan, if that makes any sense. But we were always so happy to have him with us. He joined us last time to talk about some ownership transitions. And in the second part of the conversation that we recorded that day, we spoke to him a bit about what is the legacy of the Wilpons. So let's head back to talk to Greg Prince from Faith and Fear in Flushing. We wanted to have Greg Prince back from Faith and Fear in Flushing and just kind of talk about, and the last time we spoke with him a few weeks ago, we heard about, we talked about Steve Cohen, we talked about some of the other ownership transitions, and I wanted to start with the 1980 ownership transition. There was a tiny little clause in it that nobody knew about for years and years and years that basically allowed at some point or another Fred Wilpon to take control of the New York Mets solely and essentially push out Doubleday, which occurred in 2002, 2003. Talk a little bit about the fundamental change in losing Doubleday from the combination of owners that the Mets had for that point over 20 years.
Oh, first off, I want to say I enjoyed our last visit so much I decided to wear exactly what I was wearing when we got together.
Not that many outfits.
No.
It's quarantine. We're all
fond of the 2016 postseason and its one wild card game. Anyway, Nelson Doubleday, who had been kind of the lead guy in perception and in terms of purse strings in 1980, with Fred Wilpon coming in 5% to make the deal possible for the insane amount of $21 million to buy the Mets. Together, they bought out Doubleday and Company in 86. They had the 50-50 partnership. It was not a very happy partnership between the two of them. They did not get along. Became legendary in the press. They managed to persevere. They managed to go to a World Series in 2000. But when the time came that Doubleday wanted to sell, he had to offer to the Wilpons. And Fred outlasted Nelson. 2002, it became a Wilpon and Saul Katz production, but mainly Fred Wilpon and Jeff Wilpon, who I guess had been working his way up the chain, starting from the bottom, no doubt. But, Jeff had been working the family real estate business. He had overseen the Cyclones, which were a success story, bringing baseball back to Brooklyn in a minor league way as a Met affiliate. And people were pretty happy about that. But, 2002 brought Jeff Wilpon into the spotlight, and it probably wasn't a place that he was really cut out for, because more and more over the years, he became, the face of the Mets when there needed to be an ownership face. And I think you have to remember that, once we got into the 2000s, 2002 and to 2020, the only time you heard from Fred Wilpon or Jeff Wilpon was when something went wrong, or on the most anodyne of occasions. So there was very rarely a chance to look at Jeff Wilpon and say, "Hey, here comes the bearer of good news," because they tried to stay out of the spotlight as much as possible. And I think to a certain degree, Fred and Jeff, especially Jeff, became identified with bad news, unpleasantness. And the only other time you heard about him was when, somebody was bringing a lawsuit or something, or when somebody was kind of whispering, "Hey, you know what? I had a really bad experience working for the club because of Jeff Wilpon." So the Doubleday part of the ownership, I think, is looked back on fondly, mainly because he wasn't the Wilpons and because he was the guy who kind of drove Steve Phillips, at least in public perception, to go out and get Mike Piazza, which was, really the pivot point of that era, because the Mets had been doing pretty well, but they were sadly lacking that certain something. And Piazza was available, and perhaps Fred Wilpon would have said, "Hey, Todd Hundley's going to be back in a couple of months. Let's chill." But Nelson Doubleday said, "No, go get him." Or at least that's how we remember it. And whatever, Nelson Doubleday's foible may have been kind of forgotten, because Fred Wilpon and Jeff Wilpon came in to fill the vacuum. And all we really remember at this point about Fred Wilpon before Bernie Madoff was, saying things like, "Well, we fired Joe McIlvaine because he didn't have the right skill sets," or "I hired Art Howe because he lit up a room," or "I want to," what was the phrase, we're going to play meaningful games in September after losing 95 games the year before. So there were always really great phrases in Fred Wilpon's wake, but none of it had to do with winning baseball games. And then you just have this Jeff Wilpon guy who's just not a sympathetic character by background, by personality, or by results. And then, you have the whole Bernie Madoff situation where it turns out the Mets did not have the money they thought they did. And that put us back to square one, and a reasonable replica of the, adjusted for inflation, I suppose, and for the fact that there was already some better talent around, but, an echo of the Lorinda de Roulet years. So I think that's where we found ourselves for the last 10 years, and missing Nelson Doubleday terribly, because honestly, he wasn't the Wilpons.
One of the things that will stand, I guess, by default. I mean, well, it stands by bricks, but it stands by default as probably the legacy of the Wilpon era is Citi Field. Now, obviously, they've gotten to a much better place, but even that didn't escape significant criticism as you walked into it, and it felt like a shrine to the Brooklyn Dodgers.
Yeah, I think that was not the grand slam they thought it was going to be. I think maybe if it had been unveiled, let's see, by 2009, it would have been about, say, 15 years before, when Camden Yards was making everybody gasp with delight, and there were a couple of other, for the phrase that we started using, retro ballparks coming online. It was like, wow, these are great. And it felt by 2009 that Citi Field was not that special in terms of offering some kind of innovation. Like, yeah, it feels like an old-time ballpark in theory. Well, there's 20 of those from the major leagues now. And for those who didn't care about other ballparks, who only cared that their life as Mets fans have been wrapped up in Shea Stadium. They didn't care that this new place had better food, and maybe more comfortable seats in certain sections. And yeah, the Brooklyn Dodger thing, which I always thought the criticism had been a little overwrought. Whenever I read comments like it's a Brooklyn Dodger museum, well, it's in the shape of a great New York ballpark. When you could argue whether he overdid that, and I think he did. And yeah, you had the Jackie Robinson Rotunda. I've just mentioned two very Brooklyn Dodger things, and now I'm going to try to say, well, it's not really a Brooklyn Dodger museum, but the fact that it opened with Fred in that 1955 mindset of, wouldn't it be the greatest thing in the world to build another Ebbets Field? The answer was not necessarily. And the thing I'm curious about Steve Cohen, and of course, in 2020, leading into 2021 in the world we're in now, you're not going to do it. I am curious, based on having watched the World Series in what seemed like a pretty unnecessary ballpark in Arlington, Texas, because every time they did an overhead shot, you saw there was another perfectly good ballpark sitting right next door. And having watched the Mets visit Atlanta, where they opened a probably unnecessary ballpark after having one that had been around for 20 years in Turner Field, as much as we hated that one. I wonder how soon Steve Cohen's going to say, you know what, I come in here, this place was Fred Wilpon and Jeff Wilpon's idea. I don't need this. I can afford to build a new ballpark. This isn't the Supreme Court with lifetime appointments. Again, just something that's I've been thinking about for the last week or two. You're not going to do it in 2021. Baseball is in too weird a situation like everything else in this world because of the pandemic. And we don't know what the economy is like. And I'm sure Steve Cohen didn't become the richest owner in baseball by just deciding I'm going to go build a new ballpark when I've got a perfectly good one here. I just get the feeling that we're going to see a successor to Citi Field in our lifetime. I'm probably older than both of you guys, so that may be the in our lifetime part I'm talking about, because you guys probably have many more years ahead of you than I do. But just Citi Field was a Wilpon vision, and it turned out, like you said, turned out to be fine. Once we started having a winning ball club, it turned out to be great. We found out that, hey, you can make noise in Citi Field like you could at Shea Stadium. In fact, the weekend that Cohen bought the team was the 5th anniversary of the World Series at Citi Field, which was a momentous occasion. Not the outcome we wanted, because the Mets lost it, but it was, oh my God, like it really happened here. We never thought Citi Field would have anything like this, and we never thought the Wilpons were capable of overseeing anything like this. But there was a certain tone deafness to the Wilpons all along, and maybe their good friends at the country club told them, yes, Fred, and yes, Jeff, this is a lovely blueprint you're showing me, and your ideas, they're fantastic. You should do whatever you want. But just the regular fan, I just think, felt disengaged by it. And again, I don't mean to speak for, quote, the regular fan. I know lots of people who say, hey, this is great. I like it better than Shea. And that's fine, too. But I think that was their one shot. That was their, we're going to leave our stamp on this ballpark, or this ball club, this fan base, for a generation. And I don't think it really landed the way they thought it would.
Well, based on my background, you can imagine how I respond to people who say they like Citi better than Shea, but that's my own personal preference. But I want to go back to last time we chatted. We had been talking about 77 to 79 was really the darkest point of this franchise. And I know me as a Mets fan, my entire cognizant sports fan life, Fred Wilpon has played a part of being the owner of my team. I was born in 78. I started watching the Mets in 85. So Fred's always been part of my life. And I know that I have not really considered him, particularly over the past couple decades, to be a very good owner. And I look at Steve Cohen in a little bit of kind of the white knight is riding in to save the day right now. Well, coming out of 77 to 79, I know you had mentioned that you had pulled out some of the old newspapers regarding the takeover of the Mets by Doubleday and Wilpon. Were they regarded as such the same white knights who were coming to save the franchise, if you will?
Well, much as I was just saying how Doubleday, I think, is viewed kindly because he wasn't the Wilpons, Doubleday and Wilpon were viewed kindly because he wasn't Derelay and he wasn't M. Donald Grant, or they weren't.
Right.
And at that point, anything would have been better, or so it felt. I think if you had had the 1980 version of A-Rod and J-Lo and 17 and joining them, because if you've read about it, they're Ed Kranepool, who was just retired from baseball, had tried to put together a group that included a former Nixon crony when Nixon was living in New Jersey and still basically in disgrace after resigning the presidency. And I think they would have been welcomed as white knights, to use your phrase. Anybody who said we're going to build this franchise back up to what it was, because you have to consider the timeline. 1979 was 10 years after 1969. It felt like 100 years. And 1969, the Mets are the toast of the civilized world. 1970, they break attendance records, and between the beginning of the decade and the end of the decade, they lose 2 million fans, and they're everything about them was just bad news or no news, and it was as if they practically ceased to exist. So Doubleday and Wilpon were starting from ground zero, essentially, and anything they could talk up was good news. Anything they could do was good news. They took their licks for a few years. Certainly that first season, putting out an ad campaign that said the magic is back, and nobody was buying it at first because it made it sound like, what? The Mets are still terrible. What magic? But they meant, the magic of National League Baseball in New York, the magic of a franchise you care about. In fact, and as of a harbinger, perhaps, of what would be built on the side of the Shea Stadium parking lot, the print ads had what were Jackie Robinson dancing off of third base and Ralph Branca being depressed, sitting on the steps in the visiting clubhouse at the Polo Grounds. Not, mind you, Bobby Thompson being elated. I mean, I guess Fred kind of revealed his cards then, that although they would pay lip service to, the Mets as the successors of the Giants and Dodgers, we knew where he was coming from. So it took a while for that to really take hold. And, the Mets had a big summer before collapsing in 1980. And they had their moments in the early 80s, but most of it was disappointing. And I think you reached a point by 1980, but before 1984, culminating in the letting go of Tom Seaver a second time, where it's like, well, this is never going to get any better. And just as we might have been at our most depressed, things turned around for what seemed like forever. We thought, now they've put it together. All the great young players they're bringing up from Tidewater and, in Doc Gooden's case, Lynchburg, and all the smart trades Cashin made, and the fact that they were not a free agent buying team, but they would buy out, the contracts that other teams didn't want. They would trade for Keith Hernandez or Gary Carter or George Foster, who was, it was an important move at the time, and sign them for the next few years. And it was an incredible thing because we couldn't imagine this under Derelay, the first years of free agency. And to put all of that together told us that our faith in Doubleday and Wilpon from 1980, where again, we would have taken anybody, but that they weren't kidding around, that they and Cashin and the other people Cashin hired all knew what they were doing. And by the end of the decade, you couldn't have dreamt, even though they hadn't won another World Series, you couldn't have dreamt that this wasn't like the gold standard of baseball teams. And that dissipated in the 90s, and it's been a long fight to get back there ever since.
Well, Greg, man, I really appreciate you taking the time out to join us in both weeks, and always appreciate Faith and Fear in Flushing. For those who may have missed the first part of the interview or just missed the information, tell folks a little bit about the blog.
Briefly, Faith and Fear in Flushing is me and my friend Jason Fry writing, quote, the blog for Mets fans who like to read, a lot of essays, a lot of historical stuff, as well as during the season, game after game coverage from the perspective of two guys who became friends sitting in mezzanine at Shea Stadium for about 10 years before we ever started a blog. So we've been at it since 2005, and we have a nice community of readers and then commenters, but we're always looking for more Mets fans to join us. So faithandfearinflushing.com. Thanks very much.
Absolutely. And well, as always, as we've had you on, must be a dozen times over the years, EJ. We'll definitely have you back. That goes without saying.
Well, when we have a little Steve Cohn sample, what it's like to have him own the Mets, be happy to talk about it.
Absolutely. We look forward to it. Greg, thank you again.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Greg. Great to talk to you.
Thanks.
And that is, of course, our good friend Greg Prince. Faith and Fear in Flushing is the website. You can also find a book of that name. It's a couple of years old now, but it talks about his fan journey. Lots of great stuff. Make sure you follow him on social media. One of easily, if you're looking for pure knowledge and pure stuff from the past and the present and how the two intertwine, probably one of the two most essential follows I can think of on Twitter for that type of stuff, and just an essential follow completely. EJ, I can't, it's one of those things we've said it a couple times when we put this show back on, and talk about some of the guests we want to have on. When we talk about the old show and bringing some of those guests on, I don't know that there was anybody ahead of Greg Prince.
Not in my mind, there wasn't. He is the quintessential fan. He was exactly the guy we needed to talk to regarding the Wilpon legacy. He's been around for the entire time that they were in charge as owners of the team, and he really is able to put things in perspective the way a lot of us aren't able to. So definitely appreciate him taking a few minutes with us here.
Absolutely. And like I said, every time we talk to him, I feel like I learned something. I'd like to think I'm a knowledgeable fan, but I feel like I learned something every single time that we talk to him. And that about wraps it up for this edition of the Happy Recap podcast. EJ, any final thoughts from you, my friend?
No, just hoping we get some clarity on GM this week, and then we give Steve and Sandy the ability to start making moves, because I'm dying to see what they're going to do.
I am too. I mean, it's kind of one of those things. We're starting to see the boxes pile under the tree. It's getting to the point. Can we open just a few? Just one or two? Just one or two, please? So we'll look forward to that. We'll probably do a special show if we get an announcement. Otherwise, we'll be with you in a week or so. So be looking out for that. Of course, as always, you can find EJ at the Happy Recap on Twitter. You can find me at The Real Hoove. And you can, of course, make sure you like the podcast, subscribe to the podcast. Both things help us tremendously in knowing you're out there and paying attention, and what we do is have some intrinsic value for the Met fandom or something like that. But certainly appreciate every one of you. And if you have any questions during the week, you can drop us a line at thehappyrecap@gmail.com. And certainly topic suggestions, questions, anything like that you want to throw us, constructive criticism, that spot on that EJ missed on his beard, that kind of stuff. All those things are acceptable. Just kidding, buddy. Beard's perfect. Work of art. But now I've made you self-conscious.
It's looking good. It's a little scraggly right now.
That'll do it for this week. We appreciate each and every one of you tuning in and paying attention to us just yak about some Mets. Until next week, let's go Mets.